The leather cracked against flesh with a sound that silenced even the crows. Dust swirled in lazy spirals around the town square of Copper Ridge, where 23 souls stood frozen like statues carved from shame. The morning sun cast long shadows between the weathered buildings, but none darker than the one falling across the woman tied to the whipping post. Her threadbare dress hung in tatters, revealing welts that bloomed like crimson wildflowers across her pale shoulders. 20 lashes for thievery, Sheriff Briggs announced, his voice cutting through the desert air like a rusted blade. Let this be a lesson to all who'd steal from decent folk. The woman, barely more than a girl, really, kept her chin raised, despite the tears carving clean tracks through the dirt on her cheeks. Her name was Lily Mae Thornton, though most in Copper Ridge knew her only as that widow woman with the sickly boy. She'd been beautiful once, before hunger carved hollows beneath her cheekbones and worry etched lines around her green eyes. Now she looked like a wildflower pressed between the pages of a book nobody bothered to read. Behind her, clutching the hem of a woman's worn skirt, stood little Timothy. For years old and thin as a reed, the boy's enormous brown eyes reflected the same terror that gripped every witness. His small fist pressed against his mouth to stifle the sobs that threatened to escape. The fever that had ravaged him for 3 days had finally broken, but left him weak as a newborn colt. Please, Lily Mae whispered, her voice barely audible. Above the desert wind. My boy needs medicine. I only took what I could use. The whip sang through the air again. This time, she couldn't hold back the cry that tore from her throat. You can almost taste the copper tang of blood in the air, mixed with the alkali dust that coated everything in this godforsaken town. The assembled crowd shifted uncomfortably, boots scuffing against packed earth, but nobody moved to intervene. Not against Sheriff Briggs. Not when Judge Calloway himself had pronounced the sentence from his perch on the general store's porch. His massive frame blocking out the morning light like a vulture's shadow. Judge Calloway owned half the town and controlled the other half through fear. His word was law in Copper Ridge, and his law was simple. Those who had nothing deserved nothing. Those who took what wasn't theirs deserved pain. 7. Briggs counted, wiping sweat from his brow. The sheriff was a small man with small eyes and a smaller heart, but he wielded that whip with the practiced ease of someone who'd found his calling in other people's suffering. Lily Mae's knees buckled. The rope binding her wrists to the post was the only thing keeping her upright now. Her son's quiet whimpering cut through the crowd's uncomfortable silence like a prayer nobody wanted to hear. That's when the stranger appeared that he materialized. From the heat shimmer at the edge of town, like something conjured from the desert itself, a tall figure on horseback, silhouetted against the blazing horizon. His horse was midnight black, its coat gleaming despite the dust, and it moved with the fluid grace of water flowing over stone. As he drew closer, details emerged from the mirage, a weathered leather duster that had seen 1,000 miles, a hat pulled low over eyes the color of storm clouds, and something in his bearing that made hardened men step aside without being asked. The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots hitting the ground with the soft thud of inevitability. He was perhaps 30, with the kind of lean strength that came from years of hard living, and when he moved, it was with the careful precision of a man who'd learned that careless movements could mean death. That's enough, he said quietly. The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. They carried the weight of absolute authority, spoken in a voice that had commanded respect from the Colorado Territory to the Rio Grande. Sheriff Briggs paused mid-swing. The whip coiled in his raised hand like a snake preparing to strike. Who the hell are you, stranger? The man stepped forward, his spurs chiming softly against the silence. When he spoke, his voice held the faint trace of an accent, perhaps Irish, perhaps something else entirely. Something that spoke of places far from this dusty square and the cruelty it contained. Name's Cole McKenna, he said, tipping his hat to the assembled crowd with old-world courtesy. And I believe you're making a mistake. Judge Calloway shifted, his bulk on the porch, his chair creaking ominously. Only mistake here is interfering with justice, McKenna. This woman stole medicine from Doc Harrison's shop. The penalty is clear. Cole's storm-gray eyes swept the crowd, taking in every face, cataloging every expression. When his gaze fell on little Timothy, something flickered in their depths, a recognition, perhaps, or a memory of another child in another place where justice had worn a different face? Medicine for her boy? Cole asked, his voice soft as desert wind through sage. Fever broke 3 days ago. Doc Harrison called from the crowd, his conscience clearly warring with his purse. Could have killed him without proper care. Cole nodded slowly, then reached into his vest and withdrew a leather pouch. The coins inside clinked together with the sweet music of silver and gold. How much was the medicine worth, Doc? Well, that is, Harrison stammered, suddenly aware that every eye in the square was upon him. $5, I reckon. Without hesitation, Cole counted out the coins and handed them to the bewildered doctor. Then he turned to face Sheriff Briggs, his hand resting casually on the grip of the Colt .45 that rode low on his hip. The debt's paid, he said simply. Release her. But Judge Calloway was already rising from his chair like a mountain coming to life, his face purple with rage. The law isn't for sale, McKenna. This woman broke the law, and she'll pay the price. Cole's eyes never left the judge's face as he spoke his next words, words that would echo through Copper Ridge long after the dust had settled and the crowd had dispersed. She's my wife now. The silence that followed was so complete you could hear the desert wind whispering secrets to the sagebrush. Lily May's head snapped up, her green eyes wide with shock and something that might have been hope. Little Timothy stopped crying, his small face creased with confusion, but it was the look that passed between Cole McKenna and Judge Calloway that made every soul in that square hold their breath and wonder what storm was about to break over their small, cruel world. The words hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot, thick with implications that made grown men swallow hard and shift there. Wait from boot to boot. Judge Calloway's laugh rumbled through the square like distant thunder. Your wife? McKenna, you just rode into town 5 minutes ago. You expect us to believe. Married her in Santa Fe 3 months back, Cole said with the calm authority of a man stating the weather. He reached into his vest again, this time, producing a folded document. Got the papers right here. Sheriff Briggs squinted at the document, his lips moving as he struggled through the legal language. You could practically see the wheels turning in his small mind, calculating odds and outcomes. The whip in his hand trembled slightly, whether from exhaustion or sudden uncertainty, nobody could say. That's impossible, Briggs stammered. She's been here in Copper Ridge for nigh on 2 years. Everybody knows she's a widow. Cole's smile was winter cold. My wife's been traveling, Sheriff. Had business to attend to back east, settling her first husband's affairs. Isn't that right, darling? All eyes turned to Lily May, still bound to the whipping post, her shoulders bearing the crimson evidence of 7 lashes. Her green eyes met Cole's storm gray ones across the dusty space, and something passed between them, an understanding, born of desperation and possibility. Yes, she whispered, then cleared her throat and spoke louder. Yes, that's right. The crowd erupted in murmurs like autumn leaves rustling in a sudden wind. Old Martha Henley, the town's most devoted gossip, clutched her shawl tighter and whispered something to her neighbor that made both women's eyes widen. Young Billy Crockett, barely 17 and full of romantic notions, stared at the scene with the wide-eyed wonder of someone witnessing a dime novel come to life. But Judge Calloway wasn't finished. His massive frame descended the porch steps, with deliberate menace, each footfall echoing like a death knell. Even married women can be punished for their crimes, McKenna. The law is the law, is it? Cole's voice carried the quiet menace of a rattlesnake's warning. Because I recall reading somewhere that a man has the right to discipline his own wife as he sees fit. Private family matter, wouldn't you say? The judge's face purpled further. You're saying you'd take responsibility for her punishment? I'm saying she's my responsibility, period. Cole stepped closer to the whipping post, his presence somehow making the dusty square feel smaller, more intimate. Release her. Now. For a moment, the standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Sheriff Briggs looked between Cole and the judge like a dog uncertain which master to obey. The crowd held its collective breath, sensing they were witnessing something that would be talked about in Copper Ridge for years to come. Finally, with obvious reluctance, Briggs moved to untie Lily May's bonds. Her wrists were raw from the rope, and when the bindings fell away, she nearly collapsed. Only Cole's strong hands on her shoulders kept her upright. Easy now, he murmured, his voice gentle as rainfall on parched earth. I've got you. Little Timothy broke free from the woman who'd been holding him and ran to his mother's side, wrapping his thin arms around her legs. Mama, Mama, he sobbed, his small body shaking with relief. Cole knelt beside the boy, bringing himself to Timothy's. Eye level. Hey there, son. You all right? The child studied Cole's face with the solemn intensity that only children possess. Are you really my new papa? The question hit the square like a physical blow. Even Judge Calloway seemed taken aback by the boy's innocent directness. Cole's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but when he spoke, his voice was steady. If that's what you want, Timothy, would you like that? The boy nodded vigorously, then whispered, will you make the bad men stop hurting Mama? Yes, Cole said simply. I will. He stood and helped Lily Mae to her feet, one arm supporting her waist. She leaned into his strength despite herself, her body recognizing sanctuary even as her mind struggled to process what had just happened. The stranger's touch was gentle but sure, nothing like the rough hands that had bound her to the post. We'll be going now, Cole announced to the crowd. My wife needs tending to. Judge Calloway stepped forward, his bulk blocking their path. Not so fast, McKenna. I want to see those marriage papers up close. Real close. Cole's free hand drifted toward his gun. I wouldn't recommend that, Judge. You threatening an officer of the law. I'm protecting my family. The two men stood face to face, predator and predator, each taking the other's measure. The desert wind picked up, swirling dust devils between the buildings and setting loose shutters to rattling against weathered walls. Even the horses seemed to sense the tension, shifting restlessly and tossing their heads. That it was Doc Harrison who broke the standoff. Judge, maybe we should let them be. The debt's been paid fair and square, and if they're legally married, shut up, Harrison. Calloway snapped, but his eyes never left Cole's face. There's something not right about this whole business. Only thing not right, said a new voice from the crowd, is watching a woman get whipped for trying to save her child. The speaker was Maria Santos, the Mexican woman who ran the boarding house on the edge of town. She rarely spoke up in public. Her kind weren't exactly welcome in Judge Calloway's version of justice, but her dark eyes blazed with righteous anger. That boy was dying, she continued, stepping forward despite the nervous murmurs around her. I saw him myself, burning with fever, couldn't keep nothing down. What mother wouldn't do anything to save her child? Several other voices rose in agreement, quiet at first, then growing bolder. Mrs. Patterson, who'd lost her own son to fever 2 winters back. Jake Morrison, whose wife had died in childbirth because they couldn't afford proper medicine. Even young Reverend Walsh, newly arrived from Boston and still shocked by the harsh realities of frontier justice. Judge Calloway's face grew redder with each voice raised against him. He wasn't used to opposition, especially not in his own town square. His authority had gone unchallenged for so long that even mild dissent felt like open rebellion. Enough, he roared, his voice echoing off the false fronts of the buildings. I am the law in this town. What I say goes. Not anymore. Cole's words cut through the judge's bluster like a blade through silk. He reached into his duster and withdrew. Another document, this one bearing an official seal that made Calloway's eyes widen. What's that? The judge demanded. Federal Marshal's Commission, Cole said quietly. Seems there have been complaints about corruption in this territory. Extortion, abuse of power, selective enforcement of the law. I'm here to investigate. The silence that followed was different from before, not expectant, but stunned. Federal marshals were rare as hen's teeth in places like Copper Ridge, and when they showed up, it usually meant someone powerful was about to fall hard. Sheriff Briggs went pale as morning frost. Marshal? But you said your name was McKenna. It is Marshal Cole McKenna, United States Federal Court. Cole's badge caught the sunlight as he pinned it to his vest. And Judge Calloway, you and I are going to have a long talk about your interpretation of justice. Lily Mae stared up at him in wonder. This stranger who'd appeared like an avenging angel to save her from the whip. You're really a marshal? I am, he confirmed, then added softly. But the marriage offer still stands, if you'll have me. The crowd began to disperse, sensing that the real drama was just beginning. Judge Calloway stood frozen, his empire of petty tyranny crumbling around. him like a house built on sand. Sheriff Briggs dropped the whip and backed away as if it had suddenly burst into flames. But as Cole helped Lily May and Timothy toward his horse, none of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows between buildings. A man in an expensive suit whose cold eyes missed nothing and whose thin smile promised that this story was far from over. Because in a town like Copper Ridge, where secrets ran deeper than well water and justice was just another commodity to be bought and sold, even federal marshals could find themselves in more danger than they bargained for. The boarding house rooms smelled of carbolic soap and dried lavender, a sanctuary carved from Maria Santos's determination to create something beautiful in a world determined to crush it. Lily May lay face down on the narrow bed, her torn dress peeled away to reveal the angry welts across her shoulders. Each mark told its own story of pain, but Cole's gentle hands moved across her skin with the practiced care of someone who'd tended wounds before. "This might sting," he warned, dabbing antiseptic on the worst of the cuts. She bit her lip, but didn't flinch. "I felt worse." Timothy sat cross-legged on the floor beside the bed, clutching a wooden horse that Cole had carved for him during the long afternoon. The boy's fever-bright eyes followed every movement the marshal made, as if memorizing the face of the man who'd saved his mother. "Tell me about your real husband," Cole said quietly, wrapping clean bandages around Lily May's torso. "The one who died." Her shoulders tensed beneath his touch. He was a good man. Try to make an honest living, but this territory don't reward honest men." She paused, gathering strength. He caught Judge Calloway skimming money from the territorial fund. Government money meant for roads and schools. Cole's hand stilled. "What happened to him?" "Horse threw him on the way to Carson City. Broke his neck." Her voice was flat, emotionless. "Funny thing, though, that horse had been gentle as a lamb for 5 years. Never threw nobody." The implications hung between them like smoke. Cole had seen enough accidents in his years as a marshal to recognize murder when he heard it. "You think Calloway had him killed?" "I know he did." She turned her head to meet his eyes. "James left evidence hidden away, but I never could get to it. Calloway's had men watching me ever since." Cole finished the bandaging and helped her sit up, careful not to jar her wounded back. She was beautiful even now, with her golden hair tangled and her green eyes shadowed by grief. But there was steel beneath that fragile exterior, the kind of strength that came from surviving when survival seemed impossible. "Where's the evidence hidden?" "Old Mine Shaft, about 3 miles north of town. James showed me once. Said if anything ever happened to him, I should take Timothy and run." She laughed bitterly. "But where does a woman run to with no money and a sick child?" "This was the only place I knew." Before Cole could respond, footsteps thundered up the boarding house stairs. Maria's voice rose in protest, followed by the sound of her door slamming shut. Then Sheriff Briggs burst into the room, his gun drawn and his face flushed with desperate courage. "You're coming with me." "McKenna," he panted. "Both of you." Cole moved with liquid grace, placing himself between Briggs and the bed where Lily May sat. "On whose authority?" "Judge Calloway's. Says you're impersonating a federal officer." Briggs's gun hand trembled slightly. "Says that badge is fake." "Does he now?" Cole's voice was deadly quiet. "And what makes him so certain?" "Got a telegram from the territorial marshal's office. No Cole McKenna on their roster." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Lily May's face went white, and Timothy clutched his wooden horse tighter. Cole, however, seemed almost amused. "Interesting," he mused. "Tell me, Sheriff, when did that telegram arrive?" "This afternoon. Hour ago, maybe." "Funny thing about telegrams, Briggs. They take time to send and receive." But somehow Calloway managed to get a response to his inquiry less than an hour after he sent it. Cole shook his head. Either the territorial office has developed miraculous speed, or someone's lying. Doubt flickered in Briggs's eyes, but he kept the gun steady. "Don't matter. Judge says bring you in. I bring you in. Look at the badge, Sheriff." Cole's voice took on a hypnotic quality, the tone of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "Look at the seal. Feel the weight of it. You think a fake badge would be made with that kind of craftsmanship?" Despite himself, Briggs's eyes flicked to the silver star pinned to Cole's vest. It was beautifully made, with intricate engravings, and the unmistakable heft of genuine federal issue. The sheriff's resolve wavered. That moment of distraction was all Cole needed. He moved like striking lightning, one hand knocking Briggs's gun aside, while the other delivered a precise blow to the man's solar plexus. The sheriff folded like a paper doll, gasping for breath. On the boarding house floor. "Sorry about that," Cole said mildly, retrieving the fallen weapon. "But I don't take kindly to being called a liar." Lily May stared at him with a mixture of admiration and fear. "What now? If Calloway's convinced the town you're not really a marshal, then we get that evidence your husband hid." Cole checked the loads in Briggs's gun, then tucked it into his belt. "Tonight, when the moon's dark." "It's too dangerous," she protested. "Calloway will have men watching the mine." "Probably, but not as many as he'll have tomorrow, once he's had time to organize properly." Cole knelt beside Timothy, ruffling the boy's hair. "Think you can be brave for your mama, son? We might have to do some writing tonight." Timothy nodded solemnly. "Will the bad judge try to hurt mama again?" "Not if I can help it," Cole promised. "But I need you to stay close and do exactly what your mama and I tell you." "Can you do that?" "Yes, sir." Cole stood and moved to the window, peering through the lace curtains at the street below. The sun was setting, painting the dusty buildings in shades of gold and crimson. A few townspeople moved about their evening business, but there was a tension in the air, the feeling of a community holding its breath. "There," he said quietly. Two men across the street, trying to look casual. Another one at the end of the block. Lily May joined him at the window, careful not to let her bandages show. "Calloway's men. Has to be. Question is, are they just watching or waiting for orders to move?" As if summoned by his words, a new figure appeared on the street below. The man in the expensive suit who'd been watching from the shadows earlier. He walked with the confident stride of someone who owned whatever ground his feet touched, and when he looked up at their window, his smile was cold as winter moonlight. "Dear God," Lily May whispered, her face going ashen. "That's him." "Who?" "The man who killed James. The one Calloway hired." Her voice shook with suppressed terror. "His name is Dalton Reed. They call him the preacher because he always quotes scripture before he kills." Cole's jaw tightened. Professional killers were a different breed from corrupt judges and small-town bullies. They were patient, methodical, and utterly without conscience. If Reed was here, it meant Calloway was done playing games. "We need to leave," he said. "Now." "But how?" "They're watching every exit." Cole smiled grimly and moved to the room's back window, which overlooked the alley behind the boarding house. A narrow ledge ran along the building's second story, barely wide enough for a person to walk on, but better than nothing. "Hope you're not afraid of heights," he said. Before Lily May could protest, the sound of splintering would echoed from downstairs. Maria's voice rose in angry Spanish, followed by the heavy tread of boots on wooden stairs. Multiple sets of boots. "Mama." Timothy's voice was small and frightened. Cole scooped the boy up in one arm and helped Lily May toward the window with the other. "Time to go." The ledge was every bit as treacherous as it looked, made worse by the fading light and the wind that seemed determined to pluck them from their precarious perch. Cole went first, carrying Timothy, while Lily May followed despite the pain from her wounded back. Below them, the alley stretched like a dark canyon, promising broken bones to anyone foolish enough to fall if they'd made it halfway to the building's corner when the door to their room exploded inward. Dalton Reed stepped through the wreckage like a dark angel, his cold eyes scanning the empty space with professional thoroughness. "Gone," he said in a voice like silk over steel. But not far. Behind him, Sheriff Briggs struggled to his feet, still wheezing from Cole's blow. The window. They went out the back window. Reed moved to the opening, his keen eyes picking out the three figures creeping along the ledge. He drew his gun, a beautiful piece of craftsmanship that had ended more lives than its owner cared to count. "Marshal McKenna," he called softly, "or whoever you really are. There's nowhere to run." That's when the first shot rang out, splintering wood inches from Cole's head. And in that moment, as he pressed himself against the building wall with Timothy in his arms and Lily May trembling beside him, Cole McKenna realized that his carefully laid plans were about to go straight to hell, because sometimes, even federal marshals bit off more than they could chew. The bullet whined past Cole's ear like an angry hornet, carving a furrow in the weathered wood siding. Timothy whimpered against his chest, small hands clutching at his shirt with desperate strength. Below them, the alley yawned like an open grave, promising swift death to anyone who lost their footing. Move, Cole hissed, pushing Lily May ahead of him along the treacherous ledge. Don't look down, just move. Another shot rang out, this one. Closer. Dalton Reed was taking his time, enjoying the hunt. Professional killers always did. They savored the moment when their prey realized there was no escape, when hope curdled into despair like milk left too long in the sun. But Cole McKenna hadn't survived 10 years as a federal marshal by giving up when the odds turned against him. As they reached the corner of the building, he spotted their salvation, a rope and pulley system that Maria used to haul supplies to her second-story storage room. It was old and frayed, but it was their only chance. Can you climb down? He asked Lily May urgently. She looked at the rope, then at the 20-foot drop to the alley below. Her wounded back screamed in protest at the mere thought, but she nodded. I can try. Take Timothy first. I'll lower him down to you. But what? About? Don't argue. Just do it. Lily May swung onto the rope, her hands burning as she began her descent. The rough hemp scraped against her palms, drawing blood, but she gritted her teeth and continued downward. Behind her, Cole wrapped the rope around Timothy's small waist, creating a makeshift harness. Hold tight, son, he whispered. Pretend you're a bird flying down to your mama. Timothy's fever-bright eyes were wide with terror, but he nodded bravely. I'm scared, Papa. The word hit Cole like a physical blow. This child, whom he'd known for less than a day, had already claimed him as family. The responsibility of it settled on his shoulders like a lead blanket. I know you are, he said gently. Being scared is okay. Brave men are scared too, they just don't let it stop them. He began lowering the boy, hand over hand, as more shots rang out from the window above. Reed was getting frustrated, his carefully aimed shots hampered by the angle and the gathering darkness. But the killer was patient. He knew his quarry was trapped, with nowhere to go but down. Timothy reached Lily May's arms just as Cole heard the boarding house's back door slam open. Heavy footsteps pounded into the alley, followed by the metallic click of guns being cocked. Calloway's men had surrounded the building. Well, came a familiar voice from below. Judge Calloway himself stepped into view, his massive frame blocking the alley's mouth. Looks like the great federal marshal has run out of places to run. Cole drew his Colt and checked the loads. 6 bullets against at least a dozen men. Not the worst odds he'd ever faced, but far from the best. Above him, Reed's voice drifted through the window with silky menace. Just surrender, McKenna. Make this easy on yourself. Never been one for easy, Cole called back. Then, to Lily May. When I start shooting, you run. Don't look back. Don't hesitate. Just run. I won't leave you, she said fiercely. Not after everything you've done for us. You will, he said, his voice gentle but implacable. Because Timothy needs his mother more than he needs a dead hero. The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. In the distance, Cole could hear the normal sounds of evening in Copper Ridge. Dogs barking, children playing, the distant tinkle of a piano from the saloon. Life going on as if their small drama was just another sunset in a hard land that's. When salvation arrived in the most unexpected form, Maria Santos stepped into the alley's mouth, her small frame dwarfed by Judge Calloway's bulk. In her hands, she carried a shotgun that looked older than sin, but no less deadly for its age. You get away from my borders, she said in accented English, the barrel trained on Calloway's considerable midsection. Right now, the judge laughed, a sound like boulders tumbling down a mountainside. Maria, you old fool. Put that gun down before you get hurt. I don't think so. Her voice was steady, but Cole could see the slight tremor in her hands. These people done nothing wrong. You the one breaking law, Judge. You the one needs to answer for what you done. Stand down, Maria, Calloway ordered. This is official business. Official business. She spat in the dust at his feet. Like when you killed James Thornton. Like when you steal money meant for schools and roads. That kind of official business. More voices rose from the street. Other townspeople drawn by the commotion. Cole recognized some of them from the morning's crowd. Mrs. Patterson, Jake Morrison, even young Reverend Walsh. They'd armed themselves with whatever they could find. Hunting. Rifles, pistols, a few shotguns like Maria's. That's enough, Calloway roared. All of you, get back to your homes before someone gets hurt. Only one getting hurt tonight is you. said a new voice. Doc Harrison emerged from the shadows, his medical bag in one hand and a Navy Colt in the other. I'm tired of patching up the people you've beaten. Tired of watching good folks suffer while you get fat off their misery. The balance of power had shifted like sand in an hourglass. Calloway's men looked nervous, their guns wavering as they found themselves outnumbered by angry townspeople. Even Sheriff Briggs seemed uncertain, his loyalty to the judge warring with his sense of self-preservation. Cole seized the moment. Using the rope, he swung out from the building and dropped into the alley, landing in a crouch beside Lily May. And Timothy. His gun never wavered from the cluster of Calloway's men. Seems like your neighbors have something to say about your version of justice, Judge, he said mildly. Calloway's face was purple with rage. You people don't understand what you're doing. Without strong leadership, this territory will tear itself apart. Your kind of leadership is what's tearing it apart, Mrs. Patterson called out. My boy died because we couldn't afford Doc's medicine. Died while you were getting rich off our suffering. The crowd's anger was a living thing now, fed by years of accumulated grievance and suddenly given voice. Cole felt it building like a storm front, dangerous and unpredictable. Mob justice was no better than Calloway's tyranny. It just wore a different face. That's enough, he shouted, his marshal's voice cutting through the growing tumult. Nobody else dies tonight. The crowd fell silent, but the tension remained. Above them, Dalton Reed still waited at the window, his gun trained on the alley below. One word from Calloway, and the killing would start. I want to see those papers, Doc Harrison said quietly. The ones James Thornton hid. I was his friend. I have a right to know what got him killed. Cole looked at Lily May, who nodded slowly. 3 miles north, she said. Old Copper Creek mine. James hid them in a tin box behind a loose stone in the main shaft. I'll go, offered Jake Morrison. I know that mine better than anyone. No, Cole said firmly. I'll go. This is my fight now. Our fight, Lily May corrected, her green eyes blazing with determination. James was my husband. I'm coming with you. What about Timothy? I'll watch the boy, Maria offered. He'd be safe with me. Before Cole could object, the sound of hoofbeats echoed from the street. A dozen riders thundered into view, their horses lathered with sweat and their faces grim with purpose. At their head rode a man Cole recognized, Deputy Marshal Tom Brennan, his oldest friend and most trusted ally. Cole, Brennan called out. We got your message. Relief flooded through Cole's veins like cool water. About time, Tom. I was starting to think you'd forgotten about me. Never, Brennan grinned, dismounting with practiced ease. Soon as we got word about the corruption in Copper Ridge, we rode hard to get here. His eyes swept the scene, the armed townspeople, the nervous gunman, the massive judge glowering in the alley's mouth. Looks like we arrived just in time. Judge Calloway's face went ashen. Deputy Marshal? But I sent word to the territorial office. They said there was no Cole McKenna on their roster. Funny thing about that, Brennan said conversationally. Cole's been working undercover for the past 6 months. Deep cover, so deep that even most of our own people didn't know about it. He produced a sheaf of official documents. Federal warrants for Judge Calloway, Sheriff Briggs, and one Dalton Reed on charges of corruption, extortion, and murder. Above them, Reed's gun clattered to the alley floor. The killer was many things, but he wasn't stupid. Federal marshals meant prison at best, hanging at worst. There was no profit in fighting those odds. You're under arrest, Brennan announced cheerfully. All of you. But as the marshals moved to surround Calloway's men, Cole felt a nagging worry. Things had gone too smoothly, resolved too neatly. In his experience, men like Calloway didn't go quietly. They fought like cornered animals, taking as many enemies with them as they could. His instincts proved correct. As Brennan approached with handcuffs, Judge Calloway suddenly lunged forward, a hidden derringer appearing in his massive hand. The small gun was aimed not at the marshals, but at Timothy, still clutched in Lily May's arms. You want to arrest me? Calloway snarled. Then you'll have to explain to this town how you let an innocent child die? The derringer's hammer clicked back, and Cole McKenna realized that some battles couldn't be won with badges and warrants, only with split-second decisions and the willingness to sacrifice everything for the people you loved. Time crystallized. Like desert frost in the moment before dawn. The Derringer's black mouth yawned toward Timothy's innocent face. Judge Calloway's finger white on the trigger, his eyes wild with the desperate fury of a man watching his empire crumble. In that frozen heartbeat, Cole McKenna saw not just a corrupt judge, but every bully he'd ever faced, every tyrant who'd used power to crush the innocent. The Colt .45 seemed to leap into Cole's hand of its own accord, muscle memory guiding his draw with the fluid grace of 10,000 hours of practice. The gun bucked once, its thunder echoing off the alley walls like the voice of divine judgment. Calloway's Derringer spun away into the dust, his massive hand suddenly blooming crimson. The judge's scream of rage and pain shattered the crystalline moment. He clutched his wounded hand to his chest, blood seeping between his fingers as Deputy Marshal Brennan and his men surged forward. The fight went out of Calloway's remaining gunmen like air from a punctured bladder, without their leaders. Protection, they were just hired thugs facing federal justice. "It's over," Brennan said quietly, snapping handcuffs around Calloway's thick wrists. "Judge Theodore Calloway, you're under arrest for corruption, extortion, conspiracy, and accessory to murder." But Cole's attention was already elsewhere. He knelt beside Lily May and Timothy, his hands gentle as he checked them for injuries. The boy clung to his mother with the desperate strength of someone who'd seen too much violence for his tender years. "Are you hurt?" Cole asked softly. Timothy shook his head, then looked up with those enormous brown eyes that seemed far too old for his small face. "You saved us again, Papa." The word still hit Cole like a physical blow. This child, this brave little soul who'd endured more hardship than most grown men, had claimed him as family. The responsibility of it was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. "We saved each other," Cole said, ruffling the boy's hair. "That's what families do." Over the next hour, the alley transformed from a battleground into something resembling order. The corrupt sheriff and his deputies were loaded into a wagon bound for the territorial prison, while Dalton Reed, stripped of his guns and his fearsome reputation, sat in shackles with the look of a man calculating his chances of survival behind bars. Professional killers didn't fare well in prison, especially ones who'd terrorized frontier towns. Doc Harrison returned from the mine shaft as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. His face was grim but satisfied as he handed Cole a tin box that had clearly seen better days. "Found it right where she said it would be," he reported. James Thornton was a thorough man. Documented every bribe, every stolen dollar, every threat Calloway made. He shook his head sadly. "There's enough evidence in that box to hang the judge 3 times over." Cole opened the box carefully, revealing neat stacks of papers covered in James Thornton's careful handwriting. Bank records, sworn statements, even photographs of Calloway meeting with known criminals. It was the work of a man who'd known he was risking his life but couldn't stand by while his community suffered. "He was a good man," Lily May said softly, reading over Cole's shoulder. "He just wanted to make things right." "He did make things right," Cole assured her. "This evidence will clean up the corruption from here to Carson City. Your husband's sacrifice wasn't in vain." Deputy Marshal Brennan approached, his weathered face creased with something that might have been amusement. "Cole, we need to talk about your methods. Proposing marriage to a woman you'd never met? That's a new one, even for you." Cole looked down at Lily May, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "About that," he said slowly. "I know it was just a ruse to save you from the whip, but, she prompted, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "But I meant what I said earlier. The offer still stands, if you'll have me. A real marriage this time, with real vows and a real future." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for eternity. Timothy looked between them with the intensity of a child who understood that his whole world hung in the balance. Even the marshals and townspeople seemed to hold their breath, waiting for her answer. "You don't really know me," Lily May said finally. "I'm not some frontier princess waiting to be rescued. I'm a widow with a sick child and more scars than you've seen. I've done things to survive that would shock you. I've stolen and lied and you'd do it all again to protect your son." Cole interrupted gently. "That doesn't make you damaged, Lily May. That makes you a mother. That makes you strong." She studied his face in the lamplight, searching for any sign of deception or false gallantry. What she found instead was something she'd almost forgotten existed: genuine respect, tinged with an emotion that might in time, become love. "And what about you?" she asked. "You're a federal marshal. Your work takes you all over the territory. That's no life for a woman and child." Cole's smile was soft as summer rain. "I've been thinking about that. Tom tells me there's going to be a need for a new sheriff in Copper Ridge. Someone honest, someone the people trust. It's not as exciting as chasing outlaws across 3 territories, but it's the kind of work a man could do while watching his son grow up. The kind of work that lets him come home to his wife every night." Timothy's excited gasp broke the spell. "Does that mean we get to stay together? All 3 of us?" Cole knelt down to the boy's level, his expression solemn. "That depends on your mama, son. What do you think? Should we ask her to marry us?" Timothy turned to his mother with shining eyes. "Please, Mama, please say yes." Lily May looked at the 2 males who'd somehow become her whole world in the span of a single day. The marshal who'd risked everything to save a stranger, and the boy who'd endured more hardship than any child should have to bear. She thought of James, her first husband, and the love they'd shared. He would want her to be happy. He would want Timothy to have a father. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, I'll marry you. Both of you." Timothy's whoop of joy echoed off the alley walls as he threw himself into Cole's arms. The assembled crowd erupted in cheers and applause, their voices rising into the star-swept desert sky. Even Deputy Marshal Brennan was grinning as he watched his old friend embrace his newfound family. 3 months later, as autumn painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Cole McKenna stood before Reverend Walsh in the small church. At the heart of Copper Ridge, he wore his best suit and a smile that hadn't faded since the morning he'd ridden into town. Beside him, Timothy fidgeted in his new clothes. The wooden horse Cole had carved him clutched tightly in his small hands. The church doors opened, and Lily May appeared like a vision from a dream. Her dress was simple white cotton, but she wore it like a queen's robes. Her golden hair caught the light streaming through the windows, and her green eyes shone with joy and promise. In her hands, she carried a bouquet of wild roses, the same flowers that had begun blooming again in the town square where she'd once been whipped for the crime of loving her child. As she walked down the aisle, Cole thought about the strange turns fate could take. He'd come to Copper Ridge to investigate corruption and had found something far more valuable than justice. He'd found home. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Walsh began, his young voice strong with conviction, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Cole McKenna and Lily May Thornton in holy matrimony." The ceremony was simple but perfect, filled with the warmth of a community that had learned to stand together against tyranny. When Cole kissed his bride, Timothy cheered so loudly that half the congregation burst into laughter. And when they walked out of the church together, husband, wife, and son, the wild roses in the square seemed to bloom a little brighter, as if the land itself was celebrating their love. Sheriff Cole McKenna kept his promise. He came home every night to his wife and son, and under his gentle authority, Copper Ridge grew into the kind of town where justice wore a kind face and children could play in the streets without fear. And if sometimes, late at night, Lily May traced the scars on his hands from old battles and wondered about the loneliness he'd left behind, she never said so. Some gifts were too precious to question. The wild roses bloomed every spring after that, their sweet fragrance carrying on the desert wind like a promise that even in the hardest places, love could take root and flourish. Well now, if that tale didn't warm your heart like a cup of coffee on a cold morning, I don't know what would. If you enjoyed this story of love conquering all in the Wild West, be sure to give it a thumbs up and let us know in the comments what other adventures you'd like to hear about. And speaking of adventures, we'd love to know, where in this wide world are you watching from today? Drop a comment and tell us your location, so we can see how far this little story has traveled.